Well, hello, friends. Welcome back to Commute Talk. I got the sun head on today, so I'm wearing shades, as you can see. Hope you don't mind. Um, so, someone asked me on YouTube in a comment on a video about how I got jobs at Apple and Nokia with no engineering degree or no degree whatsoever. And he asked about what kind of whiteboard questions I did and if there was whiteboard interview stuff. And I answered in detail, but then I thought, it might be interesting to talk about that in a Commute Talk video too. Because I know a lot of people, a lot of you watching are interviewing for jobs, and maybe you're still studying and you didn't even go to interviews yet. So in case it's interesting for some of you, I thought I would tell you what the interview process was like for me at Nokia and at Apple. So, of course, this is quite a while ago now. At Nokia, that was back in 2009, and at Apple, it was in 2011. But I've interviewed people since, and the process hasn't really changed that much, to be honest. I think companies make more use of online tools today than they did back then, like these websites, where you have to log in and you solve some programming problems, and they record you. But other than that, it was basically the same. So let me start at Nokia. So I traveled up to Oslo because I was living in Sweden, quite south of Oslo at the time. So I traveled up to Oslo to meet with the people at Nokia in the Commute office. And it was like a whole day reserved. And I don't remember the individual questions so much, but I met with a bunch of different people, and I met with someone from HR as well. And I distinctly remember two tasks that I had to do. And the first one was that I was given like an A4 sheet of paper. I don't know what that is in American paper, like a letter size paper or whatever. And it had like a full page of code, maybe like 12-point font. And they told me, find the bugs in this code. And it was like some pretty typical C++ for 2009, as I recall. And it had some like, I think there was an off by one and an uninitialized value somewhere. There were maybe two or three bugs, but they didn't tell me how many bugs there were. They just said, find the bugs. And it took me maybe like 10, 15 minutes to feel like, okay, I'm sure I found all the bugs. Or like, I'm reasonably sure that I found the bugs. And it turns out that, yeah, I did find the bugs. But I like that. It was like a very stressful question, but at the same time, I didn't have to write code myself, which was cool. And I have never done such a interview task since, so I liked it. I wish more companies would do that because it was enjoyable. I don't know. Maybe it was difficult for the interviewer to make any sense of what I was doing, but anyways. I guess I just liked it because it's like it's hard to memorize. Like, you know how people go and they memorize all these interview questions, right? But if you just put a paper of code in front of them, it's much harder to memorize all of the possibilities there. So I think that something that really forces candidates to think on their feet, which is really what you want in an interview, right? Anyways, and then the second question I got at Nokia, it wasn't a question, but it was a task that was done with a partner. And they partnered us up with other people who were interviewing that same day, which in retrospect is like a very Nordic thing, like this Nordic cooperation spirit. But it was confusing at the time because like I didn't understand if I was competing with these people or if they like us all, they'll hire us all or whatever. Like they didn't say. They just said like, oh, like here's another person interviewing for the same job as you. Now you're gonna do a task together, and it was an interesting dynamic. Of course, I know now that they had plenty of capacity to hire everyone, and they hired both of us in this who did this task together. But so the task we had to do was we had to design a C++ API for object serialization and deserialization. So that was the task. I don't remember how long we had. Maybe it was half an hour or something like that, 45 minutes. And I don't remember exactly what the API was, but since we were interviewing at the Qt office and I was trying to get a job doing Qt, I was already quite familiar with Qt, so I knew of the Qt DataStream API, so I sort of, made something that looked a lot like it from memory. And I remember sort of taking the lead on this task because I had this kind of clear idea of of what it might look like, and it worked out pretty well. And we didn't have to implement the API, we just had to design it. And I thought that was an interesting task as well. And the cooperation dynamics were very cool. And now that I think about it, I really liked that day of interviews. It was they did it in a very cool way, trying to assess something outside of the usual, like, can you solve these little C programming puzzles? Anyways, there were other things, but I don't remember them because it was too long ago. So those were the two I remember from Nokia. And then at Apple, I was living in Oslo at the time, and I flew out to Cupertino to do interviews because now I was living and working at that Nokia job, but Nokia was falling apart after some strategic partnerships were announced with Microsoft, and we got a new CEO who seemed very interested in ripping the company apart. So not everyone, that's hyperbole, but a lot of people, a lot of my coworkers went out to do interviews at the time, and I was no different. So I went to Cupertino to do some interviews at Apple, and in no particular order, these are some of the questions that I remember. And I should mention that at Apple, the process was that for a whole day, I think it's maybe 5 hours, and there's a lunch in the middle, but you meet with these pairs of engineers throughout the day, and one of the pairs, I think, is a manager's, and there's also an HR guy in the morning. So I guess, like, first you meet with HR, and then you meet with some engineers, and then you meet with a manager, and then some more engineers. And it's about 45, 50 minutes each, I think. And you have to do a little bit of chit-chat with each group, and then you do a programming problem or something. And I think the first one that I did was, can you find a string inside another string? And the way that all of these worked was that I would write out some crappy solution to it, and then they would say, okay, so how can we improve this? And then you iterate, and then you get to try a few different options. So I wrote out some, like, string search, like very naive string search, and then they said, well, how can we do better at this? Like, how can we optimize it? And I don't really have any academic background, so I don't know. I haven't memorized these type of things. So I just approached it like I would with any optimization problem. Like, all right, well, I don't have my profiler here, I guess, but can we look at, like, work out in our heads what's going on? And came up with, I think I made some kind of thing where we would keep a running sum of the last number of characters that we had checked that were the same length as the string we were looking for. And we had, like, a running sum, and then, like, a checksum, and then we only compared if the checksum matched the checksum of the thing we were looking for, something like that. I don't remember. It was a long time ago, but I made up some kind of little optimization there, I recall. And anyways, I think it was okay. And then I met with some other people, and then they wanted me to do like a very simple spell checker. So, and the meat and potatoes of that problem was load up a dictionary, like an English dictionary from a file, put it in a data structure, and then use that data structure to search for whether a word is in the dictionary or not. And I recall that this question was kind of biased towards data structures, and the interviewer, he had in mind that I would use maybe a trie data structure, but I was not aware of trie at the time, so I ended up using, I think, it's a hash map or something, because it's something I always say, and I always think that you can solve 90% of interview questions with hash maps and vectors, and if you don't know how to solve something, just bust out the hash maps and vectors, because you can do almost anything with those. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Like, it's so much better to solve the problem somehow than to make a beautiful solution, because these are engineering jobs you're interviewing for. You're not interviewing to become a professor of computer science, right? So people are looking to see if you can build, if you can solve. So I ended up solving, building a solution for that problem. Oh, the sun is almost going away. It'd be nice if it went away completely. And then, but it went okay. And then I met with some other people, and their question was about coins. So I had a bag of coins. I think they were values 1, 5, and 10. And it was an arbitrary set of coins. And they wanted me to produce a list of all the combinations of these coins that would produce a given sum. So, like, you got a bag of these coins, can you show me all of the combinations of the coins that would add up to 12? And don't give me any duplicates. There were some criteria like that. And I think this was maybe like one of the first times that I used recursion. Like, because I was very I don't know why, like I didn't end up using a lot of recursive techniques in programming until that point. I knew of it, and I knew how it worked, but I had never actually used it to solve a problem myself, like from scratch. So it made me a little bit nervous, I recall, because like, oh shit, I have to use recursion for this, right? And then I just sort of I think I mentioned it actually to the interviewer. They like, I don't think I've ever actually used recursion myself before, but okay, let's just try it. And I ended up being able to solve the problem because it was quite easy, you know, once I got over that initial hurdle of like, oh Jesus, recursion, huh? Because it wasn't that complicated. So those were some like straightforward programming problems. Oh yeah, and then I also remember one. There was that they gave me a domain name, or like a host name rather, like www.apple.com, and it wanted me to write an algorithm that would turn that into com.apple.www. And I remember that there's like a gimmick answer to that question, and now I don't remember what it is. I think it's that first you reverse the whole string, and then you reverse up to each dot, and then you can do it in place. But I think I was a good sport about it, because like I knew of the gimmick answer, but I was a good sport, and I wrote it out like in the naive solution, and then they asked if we could improve it, and then I want to say that I mentioned that I knew of a gimmick solution, but I don't remember if I was that good of a boy. I may have. I wish I could remember this because I guess it might speak to character, or at least the character at the time. I don't remember honestly if I tried to show off with a gimmick solution pretending I didn't know it, or if I admitted it. I don't recall. Well, it doesn't matter now. But like that only highlights the fact that these gimmick questions are kind of silly in interviews, because you do, like, having been on the interviewing side now many times, I know that you get so many interview candidates who have memorized all these gimmick answers, and it's just tiresome to sit there and watch them go through the gimmick answer. And some people pretend that they haven't seen the question before, and then they like sort of they try to look like they're working their way to the gimmick answer, and then other people they just start writing it out right away without saying anything. And I don't know which one I was. Probably I was not the most honest boy about this, but I don't know. I wish I could remember. Anyways, it is silly. Like, it's better to have novel questions than to have textbook questions, because memorized answers are just never fun. Anyways, so those were some of the programming problems I got. But then I also recall at Apple that one pair, they didn't want me to do any programming, but instead they wanted me to do some debugging. And it was about, because they knew I was already active in the WebKit project, so I knew how to debug WebKit issues. So they gave me a debugging task, which was that, say that you get the latest nightly build of WebKit, and you fire it up, and then you go to Wikipedia, and the logo doesn't show, like the Wikipedia logo. Now, how would you debug this? And I remember the interviewer said, like, just imagine that I'm the computer, and you can ask me to do anything, and I will give you an answer. And that was really enjoyable, actually. I really love that question, because I was quite familiar with debugging issues like that at the time, because I worked on the Qt WebKit port, and the smaller ports, they had a lot of these little issues that you just had to debug all the time. Could be all kinds of things going wrong. But yeah, that was just awesome. I love that question so much. And I think the simulated problem turned out to be that there was some kind of a regression introduced in SVG or document parsing, but I don't remember for sure. But like the guy made a really good simulation of a bug. I remember just thinking, wow, that's an amazing interview question. Anyways, what else was there? And someone else I met with, I think we talked about the Canvas API, the HTML Canvas API. And he was asking me, I think this was at the time, this was the director of the department, Richard Williamson, who asked me about this. We talked about the Canvas element and like what I would do differently if I were to design it now, because I had recently been working on some stuff for making the WebKit canvas behave more like the HTML spec said it would behave, because the canvas element originated in WebKit, right? And it was really designed as the core graphics CG context API is designed. So it sort of mimicked the CG context idiosyncrasies quite closely. And I remember that in that interview, I talked about path rendering, and how I think that it's a bit stupid that in CG or in core graphics, the context has a path that you build up by adding path components to the context. And then when you've built a path, then you can say okay, context, now fill the path. And in most other graphics APIs, a path is like a separate object, and then you can tell your context or whatever equivalent that, hey, please fill this path with this color. And I thought that was a better separation where you would have like a separate path object. So we talked about that, and I don't know. It was okay. It was fun. Gosh, I think maybe these are all the ones that I remember. Oh yeah. And there was one more where they asked me if I could talk about an interesting problem that I had recently worked on. And this was the question I guess I feel like I fumbled the most, because I made a mistake here, and I started talking about a problem that I'm currently working on rather than talking about an interesting problem that I had recently solved. Because I realized that I got like halfway into it that, wait a minute, I don't know what the solution to this problem is yet. And it was something about, I was trying to do this optimizations for, I think it was like anti-aliased 2D graphics. I was trying to, I wish I could remember. In Qt, it was in Qt, we had like taken this rasterizer code from the FreeType project, I think. And it appeared to be a bottleneck in many situations when we would do very aggressive 2D rendering stuff. And I had some wild ideas about data structures that might be better to optimize that code. And I don't know, it was just like, that was the stuff that was fresh in my head at the time, and I just started talking about that. And then it got to a point where I realized, oh shit, like I don't know what the solution to this is, and now I'm just sitting here like telling the story of an interesting problem that I've solved, but I don't know the solution. But I was able to sort of backtrack and let them in on how I had just realized that I don't know the solution. And they were nice about it. But yeah, that was a bit weird. And oh yeah. And then the final question I remember was about scrolling. There were these two engineers who asked me how I would implement really, really fast scrolling, like document scrolling. Like you pan up and down on an iPhone and it scrolls really fast. And at the time that was very impressive, because most mobile devices, they were not like buttery smooth with the scrolling. And they asked me how I would implement that. And they were sort of, I guess they were sort of fishing to see if I could tell them how core animation works. And I didn't really know how core animation worked, but I sort of tried to come up with something that would work, where you would have like different layers, and then you would have like a content layer where you would render the web page content into that layer, and then you would have like the UI layers, and then you would just use the GPU to compose them and move the content layer up and down when you scroll. And they seemed satisfied with my answer, so that was good. And and these guys, they also asked me how I would rate my C++ skills. And I remember I liked that question. I think I said that I would rate them a 6, maybe a 7 if I can have internet access. Because I don't think that I'm necessarily much stronger than a 7 today either, 7 or 8. Because the language is so broad, and there's like all this stuff that I don't know, and it's important to be honest about like your knowledge level and where your skills at. And I'm very weak with templates, for instance. Like I just use them as a tool, but I don't know how to do all the tricks. So it wouldn't be right to call myself a 9 or a 10 in C++. and I guess that's what they were what they were fishing for, because in retrospect, I know these guys who asked the question, and like if I if I had said like a 9 or a 10, I would probably have been grilled on trivia until I felt very, very silly. So, and rightly so. Anyways, I think these were all the questions that I could remember. And wow, the sun has actually stopped bothering me now, so I guess I can take these off. Yeah. So, I guess those were indeed all the things I can remember. It was almost 10 years ago, so I hope that was interesting to someone, and I hope that they've changed their questions since. Because if you guys are still using those questions, now's the time to change them. Because I just told people, but I have to assume that they've changed. Anyways, I guess I should also say welcome to all the new subscribers. It's really, really fun to have more of you guys here, and I hope you enjoy the content. I try to stay on a regular-ish upload schedule. So this Commute show takes questions, so feel free to submit them in the comments down below if you have anything that you would like me to talk about, or questions about anything really that I seem interested in, or it seemed like I would have something interesting to say about. Other than that, I'm just going to say thanks for hanging out with me on the commute, and everybody have a great week, and I'll see you next time. Bye.